Well, hello everyone, welcome back to Final Fantasy XIV Story Mode, and a little supplemental bonus thing to put a little bow on this here Bozjan side story. But first, I think that this might require like a little bit of contextualizing, so to explain. We have seen the entirety of the Bozjan story that is in the game, but there is a little bit more to be seen. And the reason for that was the pandemic. Shadowbringers patches were coming out in the thick of the pandemic, and though they were like pretty impressive in managing to keep production on the patches and the development of Endwalker trucking along despite all of that, they did still have to make some cuts and do some streamlining on their production plans for the Shadowbringers patches, and unfortunately, included in that was the sort of like last chapter or act or whatever of Bozjan that they originally had planned. Originally, apparently, there were meant to be like 3 zones that you go to. Like we had the southern Bozjan front and we had Zadnor. Apparently there was originally meant to be a 3rd and sort of like an additional chapter to this here story, but they had to kind of hastily figure out a way to wrap it up in 2. And the remainder of some of the story that they wanted to get in there, they squeezed into field notes. Field notes were things that sort of like drop from some of the, honestly, I don't even know what all they dropped from. I think they dropped from some of the skirmishes and the critical engagements and the duels. We definitely got some of them with Durman, as you saw kind of near the beginning, but there's a lot more than Durman has gotten, and in order to get all of them, unfortunately, you have to do a lot of Bozjan. Like, I think you might even have to succeed at all of the duels yourself, and I'm not pulling that off at all, definitely not. But fortunately for us, some of the folks in the Dentalis Theater Company have done exactly that, which will not probably come to a surprise to you at this point. And specifically, Luna was kind enough to record footage of all of those field notes for me so that I could have them and read them to you. Now, I should mention, there are a lot of these things. I think there's 50 field records in total, and I'm not going to read all of them here today because if I did, this would be like 3 hours long. But I will read all of the ones which effectively function as the abbreviated final chapter of this story that was originally intended to be included in the content of the game itself, which I'm glad at least exists in this form, if nothing else. I do recommend reading all of them if you have been enjoying the story and are interested in the setting. I will put a link down in the description to a website where you can read all these yourself if you want. But to keep this little extra video from getting too out of hand, let's just focus on the records which kind of function as the conclusion to the story. Sound good? Excellent. Now let me find a good place to set up and we will begin. Okay, it turns out there's not actually much in the way of seating in this here camp, so we're just going to stand at the table and read instead. So, to begin. Dabog an Inivish. The following is an excerpt from the interrogation of one Sicinius Malvelatus of the 4th Imperial Legion. 'Tis true, Lord Valens and the engineers of the 7th Legion laid the foundation for my work, but let it be known, it was the genius of Sicinius Malvelatus that perfected the hypertuned soldier. To speak in terms that you might understand, I devised a technique that allowed the extraction of memories from my dear test subject 8, Dabog. Said memories could then be implanted into other Hrothgar captives, thereby allowing mass production of hypertuned soldiers. Brilliant, is it not? It was a breakthrough that would forever change the face of war as we knew it, or rather it should have. I am, admittedly, something of a perfectionist. It was not enough to simply manufacture an assortment of hypertuned soldiers. They had to be perfect, uniform. Which is why I may have made more than a few aesthetic modifications to ensure they all resembled the original Dabog. I can hear Valens now. Why even bother? All those damned animals look alike, and he certainly isn't wrong. They all do bear an uncanny resemblance to one another. Nevertheless, it was a detail I refused to overlook, and I could scarcely wait to see the looks upon your comrades' faces when my soldiers took to the field. Ah, what a sight it was! The slackened jaws, the wide eyes of disbelief. A memory I shall treasure for all my days. It is said the sign of true genius is innovation able to elicit shock and awe, even within the innovator themselves. After that crowning achievement, I've no doubt the genius, the spectacle of my work will still be spoken of long after you and I are gone. Please do not frown so. Not everyone's made for greatness, and I've long since learned not to judge others for their mediocrity. Now, I assume your plans after this are to lock me up and throw away the key, as it were, yes? Well, before you do, I intend to tell you each and every one of my technological achievements, and I expect you to write down every word. your descendants will thank you. Assuming, of course, they have the forethought to put my knowledge to good use. And spare me the drivel about your new Bozja being free from the horrors of war. Whether you like it or not, there will come a day when you must again lock blades with enemy forces, when you must seek out new advanced weaponry, train soldiers, and plan strategy. On such a day, the people will remember me, my genius. Wait, where are you going? You have yet to even scratch the surface of my brilliance. Leon Quohalsos. Formerly a beastmaster of the 4th Imperial Legion, Leon was blamed for the 4th Legion's defeat at Zadnor upon his return to Dalmasca, his punishment being a demotion to Centurion and a lengthy spell in jail. Then, half a year later, the unimaginable occurred: the assassination of Legatus Gabranth at the hands of Leon. The following information was obtained in an investigation carried out by the Provisional Government of Dalmasca. Though Leon served 6 months of his sentence, he was able to escape with the assistance of an accomplice within the 4th Legion. Rather than abscond when he had the chance, he instead infiltrated Gabranth's quarters in the dead of night. It is believed that the Legatus had sustained injuries in battle with the Dalmascan resistance and was recuperating at the time, and that, after an exchange of words, Gabranth accepted his fate before Leon delivered the fatal blow. The assassin then set the room ablaze before fleeing Castrum Valneni with his accomplice. Following the 4th Legion's unconditional surrender, the Resistance named Leon as a wanted war criminal. Though a large bounty was placed on his head, his whereabouts remained unknown for some time. Then, 3 months after the fall of his former legion, Leon was sighted in Valnain by a member of Rumta Zaram, an organization whose name means the spear in the dark in Old Dalmascan, specializing in the hunting of escaped war criminals. Leon had come to turn over the former senior engineer of the 4th Imperial Legion's Magitech detachment, Sicinius Malvelatus, who was also a wanted man since his disappearance following the events at Zadnor. Once Leon had handed over his captive, he vanished without a trace. The Rumta Zaram member who oversaw the matter assumed that Leon was a mere bounty hunter and failed to realize he was the man once feared as the Beast King. Sicinius himself was bound and unconscious at the time, and even when brought to trial, he seems to be unaware that Leon was the one who captured him. Why Leon would seek to profit by turning in a former ally remains unclear. His bounty has since been raised, but no further sightings have been made. Though the Rumta Zaram allowed Leon to slip through their fingers, they were able to verify that he was accompanied by a young Lalafellan woman. There is reason to believe that she is Pagaga Quovostein, Leon's suspected accomplice, who has also earned herself a place on the wanted list. Pagaga, by the way, is another 4th Imperial Legion beastmaster who would have been one of the various enemies that you could encounter out in the skirmishes in Zadnor. The field notes have a biography for her as well, but I will let you go read that one yourself if you want. Menenius Saslanatus. Tribunus of the 4th Imperial Legion, Menenius serves loyally as Legatus Gabranth's chief intelligence officer. With the Empire now fallen and no reinforcements from Garlemald on the way, the 4th was forced to make their last stand in Dalmasca and Bozja. Astutely concluding that fighting on 2 fronts would soon deplete their resources and rations, leaving the Legion scarcely able to sustain themselves, let alone fight, Noah van Gabranth made the decision to abandon Bozja and focus on holding Dalmasca alone. And yet he could not simply order a complete withdrawal, lest the Eastern Alliance immediately swoop in and attack them from Bozja as well as Doma. Until such time as they were able to muster their full strength in Dalmasca, they had to hold strong on the Bozjan and Nangshian fronts. This was the task entrusted to Menenius, to preserve a stalemate here and buy needed time by whatever means necessary. It was not a glorious task, but it was one the Tribunus accepted willingly. To this end, Menenius devised multiple stratagems. First among them involved employing the legendary might of Save the Queen and its powers of tempering. So it was that Messia gave her life for the cause, delivering a great blow to the resistance. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the Tribunus continued his search for the armaments, frightful weapons of ancient Alec. The expedition bore fruit in Zadnor, in the form of the Diablo armament, which was quickly deployed in Dalmasca to keep the resistance at bay. Menenius then proceeded to unearth yet more frightful holy relics, which he employed to send further horrors to the battlefield to fight in the Empire's name. All this succeeded in prolonging Garlean control in Dalmasca for a measure, but Menenius knew as well as any it would not be a final solution, and that the once proud 4th Legion was nearing its last days. Menenius had known Noah since the two were children. Since the day the latter assumed command as legatus, his orders were always delivered with confidence and clarity. Even more important, the full intent behind his orders, Gabranth's ultimate goals, and the repercussions and effects his actions would entail, all were clearly conveyed, explicitly or implicitly. This time, Menenius could not fully grasp his commander's intentions. Leon, on the other hand, seemed quite certain of the truth, a truth Menenius himself vaguely suspected but perhaps did not want to accept. The scouts and intelligence operatives Menenius had dispatched throughout the region brought him regular reports. As they told it, Noah was most concerned with what would become of the various resistance leaders after they'd won their independence and the Garlean occupation was no more. He sought to know their plans, the blueprint they would follow. As he considered this, Menenius realized with a sinking feeling that his suspicions were on target. Here in Bozja, so long as Bysalion occupied a position of leadership, Noah's ultimate goal would be realized. But what of Dalmasca? More populous than Bozja, and with its various factions far from united, the future was far from certain. Knowing Noah, he doubtless already understood this, and had already deployed a pawn to guide Dalmasca in his desired direction. And so Menenius pondered. Leon had once posed the question, is there a need for one so young and full of promise to throw away their life in a bloody war? Of course not, thought Menenius. With defeat, death is inevitable. But it is the duty of those at the top, myself included, to give our lives so that those who follow us may still live. This Menenius knew, for he was above all a military man, and he knew the ways of armies and war. Still, was this truly the answer? Noah van Gabranth, young Noah, who Legatus Bosch entrusted to him, whose life his father-in-law Lucius risked his life to protect. Was this all Menenius could do now? To loyally assist his legatus throw his own life away? Leon assured him that Noah's mind was already made up. Still, Menenius could not fully accept it. Is this truly the answer? The Diablo armament. Icons were perhaps one of the greatest threats to the Allagan Empire, and the Allagans devoted a great deal of their resources to two primary means of combating them. The first were war machina akin to the Ultima weapon, designed to feed on the very life force of the icons they were built to destroy. The second were biological weapons resembling the recently unearthed Diablo armament, designed to harness the power of entities from the Void. The Allagans had long believed the Voidsent could make for powerful thralls. However, there were two key obstacles to their weaponization. Firstly, there was the matter of preparing a suitable host. The strength of the Voidsent one may summon is largely dictated by the vessel it will occupy. The entity that might inhabit the corpse of a Curl, for example, would be several orders of magnitude weaker than one inhabiting the corpse of a behemoth. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, was the unpredictable nature of Voidsent and their need to feast on ether. A binding spell could be cast at the time of their summoning to subjugate them, but the efficacy of these incantations drops significantly when employed against the higher echelons of Voidsent. In short, the Allagans required immeasurably powerful hosts and an equally potent means of binding these creatures to their will. Neither could be obtained through natural means, and so, as one might expect, the Allagans turned to science for solutions. In the end, they chose to use genetically augmented components to create what they believed to be the perfect host, paired with the restraints used to imprison Mericidian dragons. The weapon discovered in Zadnor was, in all likelihood, an interim vessel for Diabolos, a demonic Voidsent believed to occupy the second rung of Voidal hierarchy. It would not be easily summoned, much less bound, and so researchers speculate it could not have been encountered until after Emperor Zandi formed the pact which opened a gateway to the world of darkness. Moreover, it is quite possible the ancient Allags intended to unleash this chimerical monstrosity upon the fledgling nation of Bozja to test its abilities. Though we but glimpsed its power, it appears the Allagans succeeded in creating a formidable addition to their arsenal, perhaps even comparable to the Ultima weapon. It remains to be seen if more such weapons lie buried beneath the plateaus of Zadnor. Fran Eriut, which is maybe almost how that last name is pronounced. Though Fran seldom discusses her background, from her remarkable leadership and proficiency as both a tactician and warrior, it is presumed the General of Linte's Tears has many years of experience and most likely an age to match. She is also believed to be a former member of the Dalmascan peacekeeping forces, which, if true, further supports this theory. The organization was primarily charged with protecting the royal family and the capital of Rabanastre, with their jurisdiction limited to the confines of the city. Even among such a specialized group, Fran was assigned to a unit that dealt with organized crime and the most hardened offenders. Fran and her comrades were known as the Sarab, and their operation was completely separate from the rest of the peacekeepers. While the organization as a whole was established specifically to protect the royal family and the capital, the Sarab's activities included maintaining public safety and order throughout the kingdom. Were a threat to the realm to arise, the Sarab had the authority to take any measures necessary, even if said threat involved members of the nobility or the royal family itself. As such, the Sarab worked in complete isolation, with the identity of its members only known to those belonging to the unit. It is for this reason that even towards the end of the war with Garlemald, members of the royal fusiliers, such as Bagamnan and Bozjan, never came into contact with Fran. Fran led one particular group within the Sarab, whose duties included protecting designated persons from the shadows, pursuing suspected rebels and cult members, and preventing attempted espionage by foreign nations. The final task assigned to Fran's group was the, quote, assassination of Princess Ashelia. In truth, it was a secret mission to fake the princess's death and have her live on in secret, thus protecting the royal bloodline. The plan was a success, with Bagamnan and several other fusiliers witnessing the staged assassination and unwittingly fulfilling their role of spreading the false news of her death. Even the ones who handled the princess's supposed corpse were Fran's subordinates. The mission was carried out under the permission of Princess Ashelia's twin brother, Prince Rasler, who knew that defeat to the Empire would mean the execution of the entire royal family. Were the people of Dalmasca allowed to know that Ashelia was still alive, they would be incensed to fight the Garleans to the last man, despite there being no hope of victory. Rather than watch his people die in vain, he devised a means of spiriting her away, even going so far as to keep his plan a secret from his father, the king. The princess was put into a deep sleep, using a method passed down from Fran's kin, until the day arrived for the kingdom to be reborn. When Ashelia finally awoke some 30 years later, many of her memories had abandoned her, but she could still remember her identity and purpose. However, whether it was a result of her induced slumber or because of the emotional scars left by the horrors of war, she would often find herself assailed by images of the past. In the years that had passed, Fran had become a general of Lente's Tears, and she continued in this role while also acting as advisor to Ashelia. During the events surrounding the mystical aura site, Fran encountered the selfsame former royal fusiliers who had, unbeknownst to them, cooperated in faking the princess's death. To compound Fran's feelings of guilt, their leader, Bagamnan, had undergone a hideous transformation and was subsequently killed, denying her the opportunity to make amends with him. Although 30 years had passed since Bagamnan was deceived into believing the princess to have been killed, Fran could not escape the feeling that, had she revealed the truth to him, the terrible fate that befell him could have been averted. Another of the royal fusiliers, Bagamnan's brother, Bozjan, eventually became a loyal friend to Fran. While he and his comrades are not aware that Ashelia is in fact the princess herself, they believe her to be a descendant of the royal bloodline. It remains to be seen whether their feelings of joy will be unchanged upon hearing the truth. But when the time finally comes for Fran to explain the events of that fateful day, she is prepared to face the consequences of her actions. However, that time has yet to arrive. Now that Bozjan has shaken off the yoke of imperial rule, the resistance cannot afford to let the opportunity to liberate Dalmasca escape them. Until then, Fran will continue to wear the mask of deception and keep the truth hidden from her allies. Hien Regine. It really does seem like, judging from the entries I'm seeing here, kind of toward the end of these field records, it really does feel like, had this story been allowed to continue, and I don't think it's going to. I think we, unfortunately, from what limited information I or anyone else can really gather, it sounds like these two collaborations between Yasumi Matsuno and the Final Fantasy XIV team for the Ivalice raids and now this Bozja series, it doesn't sound like there are any expectations of them collaborating further after this point, which is a shame. It does seem like there were plans for this story to continue eventually maybe to the liberation of Dalmasca, the kind of stuff that a fan of Final Fantasy XII like me would very much have loved to see. But it does seem like in those original plans, Doma was going to start getting a lot more actively involved in the fight as well. It's a shame we probably won't ever get to see any of that, but oh well. Hien Regine, the renowned warrior king of Doma, eldest son of the former king, Kain, and his wife Mina, Lord Hien was conceived just before the imperial invasion of his homeland. By the time the infant gave his first cry, Doma was under the imperial yoke, and so did Hien grow up under the Garlean occupation. Allowed to learn traditional Doman culture and martial arts under the condition that he also received a proper imperial education, the young child immersed himself in his studies under his tutor, Gosetsu, a loyal vassal of his father, mastering the swordsmanship of a samurai and developing a strong identity of himself as a man of Doma. When still young, Hien took part in an armed uprising led by his father, an attempt that nearly succeeded in taking back Doma Castle until it was unceremoniously quashed by the 12th Legion, summoned to the scene as reinforcements. In the struggle, Lord Cayenne was tragically cut down by Xenos Ye Galvas. Bereft of his beloved father, Hien fled desperately for his life to the vastness of the Azim Steppe. Over time, Lord Hien would come to join forces with a hero come from distant Eorzea to the west, together with loyal subjects Gosetsu and Yugiri, and with the unwavering support of his people, the Domans, Lord Hien would succeed in toppling the occupying Garlean army commanded by acting Viceroy Yotsuyu, achieving independence for his homeland anew. Painfully aware of the difficulty of resisting the might of Garlemald as a lone, isolated nation, Lord Hien entered into an agreement with the Eorzean Alliance, while simultaneously enlisting the aid of such independent-minded entities as the Nomads of the Azim Steppe and the Pirates of the Ruby Sea. Together with the forces of Nangxia and Dalmasca, recruited to the cause sometime after, these would form the Eastern Alliance that would stand against the Empire across the continent of Othard. Before commencing their own large-scale rebellion, the leaders of the Bozjan resistance paid a visit to Lord Hien, receiving from him a promise to offer military support as necessary, as well as inspiration for a method by which the internal conflict within the resistance itself might be mediated, to wit, by the reforging and reforming of Gunhilder's blades. For Lord Hien's part, though he was heartened that his Eorzean friend had also promised to join the battle on the resistance's behalf, lingering doubts remained. The Garleans were an invading force, yes, but were they not also men driven by their own sense of justice? A war waged between two mighty forces, the leaders of each believing their own cause the righteous one, would no doubt prove a bitter struggle, and one that would not end without considerable tragedy and suffering on both sides. When he heard that, in fact, the new incarnation of Gunhilder's blades had been reborn into a tempered monstrosity, only to perish in the end, Lord Hien was deeply troubled. What was the meaning of his presence on such a nightmarish battlefield? A true hero should be a beacon of light to all, akin to the kami who illuminate the heavens. Yet all he could accomplish here was to lead the victor over the vanquished, leaving his hands stained with the blood of the fallen at battle's end. And yet Hien understood that this too was a role that someone must fulfill. If not, a people would suffer indeterminately under a rule of tyranny. And so he would put an end to it, even if it meant bloodying his own hands. Better that he accept this now than force a similar fate upon the next generation when they grew to adulthood. If this conflict could be resolved without bloodshed, he would give anything to see it done. But sadly, that was not an option now, and mayhap had never been at all. No doubt his Eorzean friend too realized this, and no doubt it weighed equally as heavily on both their hearts. My friend, if you would bloody your hands for this cause, then pray, let me bloody mine with you. After all, it is no greater or less an evil than that which I once asked of you. Until the day when all the people of our world can live in peace, let us walk this path together. And finally, Noah van Gabranth. Legatus of the 4th Imperial Legion, Noah van Gabranth assumed his position ere he had reached 20 summers, when his father, Bash van Gabranth, succumbed to a deadly illness. He spent much of the 3 decades since ensuring that Dalmasca and Bozja remained under the imperial yoke, marching his men across the region to quell rebellions and revolts in territories controlled by the Fourth. The Fourth is oft regarded as anomalous and eccentric among the Empire's legions, and with good reason, for it is the only one to count a greater number of foreigners than native-born Garleans among its ranks. This includes the legatus himself, who has made it his policy to accept any and all capable individuals into his company. So long as the individual in question swears loyalty to the Empire, the Fourth welcomes their contributions, regardless of race, gender, or country of origin. Ability and results delivered are valued above all. A true meritocracy. Gabranth applied a similar philosophy to the provinces under his rule, eschewing the traditional Garlean approach and tailoring his style of governance to suit the people of each individual region. Emperor Solus found this most admirable, though it is said that Emperor Varus was far more skeptical, believing it a sign that Gabranth harbored lofty and dangerous aspirations ill-befitting his station. A charismatic figure, beloved by almost all in command, Gabranth's fate took a dark turn after his defeat in Bozja. His once vaunted legion left struggling to fend off the combined counterattack of the Dalmascan Resistance and Eastern Alliance. Depleted and run ragged after multiple battles with the Resistance army, and with no reinforcements from his homeland coming to save him, morale dropped to an all-time low, and the Fourth stood in danger of losing a vital outpost. It was then that events took another unexpected turn, as the Beast King Leon, taking extreme umbrage at being held responsible for the Fourth's defeat, plotted mutiny against the self-same leader to whom he once swore undying loyalty. Escaping his jail cell with the help of his co-conspirators, he snuck into the chamber where Gabranth lay wounded in the dead of night. After an exchange of words between the two men, it was clear the legatus's mind was made up. He succumbed to his subordinate's blade with no resistance. The deed done, Leon set Castrum Valneni ablaze and fled the scene to destinations unknown. Later, the body and armor of the ill-fated Gabranth would be discovered by the Resistance, though he was not immediately identified as such, in part because the burns were so severe that his face could scarcely be recognized, and in part because so few had seen the face under the mask in the first place. Still, in the end, the identity of the corpse was confirmed, and news of the death of Noah van Gabranth spread across the land. Bereft of their charismatic leader, the once proud Fourth Legion quickly crumbled, some 2/3 of its numbers surrendering unconditionally to the Resistance, while the remaining third fought in vain before being unceremoniously decimated by their foe. So did the long and bitter struggle come to an end, and Dalmasca shook free from the imperial yoke for the first time in over 3 decades. And yet, still, there are those who believe that Noah van Gabranth did not perish that day in Castrum Valneni, that the corpse, mutilated beyond identification, belonged to another. Meanwhile, Leon and the other former officers of the Fourth, war criminals all of them, remain at large, and the provisional government approved the repatriation of the vast majority of the Fourth's rank-and-file soldiers as free citizens, electing not to try them for their crimes on the battlefield. So it is that the people of Dalmasca still live in fear of the ghost of Gabranth, further details regarding which will be filed in a future report. I mean, maybe this is the last one I'm aware of, but who knows? The MMO continues. Anyway, now we are done with this big Bozja side story. I hope you have enjoyed. Thank you again to Luna for sending me footage of these field reports. Again, if you would like to read the rest of them, which I've only read like a fraction of them here, I've got a link down in the description where you can find all of them. And there's some good flavor in there, so I recommend it. But that is quite a hecking enough with side stories. Now, at last it is time to return to main story quest scenario concerns. I will see you next time for that. Goodbye.